One cowboy thought 10 Bigfoots were just campfire stories, until their shadows crossed his ranch. The shadows stretched across Ezra Blackwood's ranch at exactly 7:23 in the evening on October 13, 1889, moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit, despite belonging to creatures that should not have existed according to every scientific principle that 41 years of galactic education had taught him. 10 massive silhouettes, each standing at least 9 feet tall, crossed the golden wheat field behind his barn in perfect formation, their shapes blotting out the setting sun like eclipse fingers, reaching across his carefully cultivated land. Ezra dropped the horseshoe he had been examining, the hot metal hitting the dirt with a dull thud that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence that had fallen over his entire ranch. His cattle, normally placid creatures genetically modified to thrive in frontier conditions, were backing away from the fence line with the kind of primal terror that suggested they recognized predators that operated outside the normal food chain hierarchy. Even his enhanced alien senses struggled to process what he was witnessing. The electromagnetic signatures emanating from the 10 figures were unlike anything in his extensive xenobiological database, clearly terrestrial in origin, but organized according to patterns that spoke of intelligence, coordination, and technological sophistication that no unknown Earth species should have possessed. For 4 decades, Ezra Blackwood had been living the perfect cover identity as a successful rancher in the Montana Territory, serving as a deep reconnaissance agent for the Stellar Collective while maintaining careful surveillance over human development in the American West. His mission had been straightforward: monitor technological progress, assess cultural evolution, and ensure that no hostile alien forces established footholds in strategically valuable territories. The reports he had filed with his superiors had consistently dismissed human folklore about creatures like Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and similar cryptozoological entities as primitive mythology with no basis in biological reality. His sophisticated scanning equipment, hidden throughout his ranch, had never detected any large unknown species in the region, and his scientific training had convinced him that such creatures were impossible given the ecological constraints of North American ecosystems. But the shadows now crossing his property moved with purpose that transcended any natural behavior patterns. They were not foraging, not migrating, not following any of the instinctive drives that govern terrestrial wildlife. Instead, they appeared to be conducting some form of systematic surveillance, examining his ranch with the methodical attention to detail that characterized intelligence-gathering operations. Ezra activated his enhanced vision systems, alien modifications to his optical cortex that allowed him to perceive electromagnetic spectra far beyond human capabilities. What he saw through the golden light of sunset made his carefully maintained emotional equilibrium fragment like glass struck by lightning. The 10 figures were not just large and bipedal, as human descriptions had suggested. They were wearing equipment, subtle modifications to their natural appearance that spoke of technological sophistication rivaling his own people's achievements. What appeared to be natural fur was actually an advanced camouflage system that adapted to environmental conditions in real time. What looked like primitive tool use was actually manipulation of devices that his alien sensors could barely detect, let alone analyze. Most disturbing of all, one of the creatures was looking directly at him despite being nearly a quarter-mile away, its gaze meeting his enhanced vision with the kind of confident acknowledgement that suggested it knew exactly what it was looking at and was unimpressed by whatever advanced capabilities it perceived. The voice that reached him across the distance bypassed atmospheric transmission entirely, arriving in his consciousness through quantum entanglement communication methods that even his own civilization used only for the most secure military applications. Ezra Blackwood, Agent 4471 of the Stellar Collective Deep Reconnaissance Division, you have observed our world for 41 of your years while remaining blind to its most ancient guardians. We are the Sasquatch Assembly of the Northern Provinces. Your presence has been tolerated, but your ignorance has become problematic. The implications hit Ezra like a meteor strike to his carefully constructed worldview. For over 4 decades, he had believed himself to be conducting covert surveillance of a primitive world, whose most dangerous inhabitants were barely beyond Stone Age technology. The discovery that not only had indigenous intelligence been aware of his presence, but had been conducting counter-surveillance sophisticated enough to penetrate his deepest cover, represented a failure of galactic intelligence on a scale that would require complete revision of Earth's strategic assessment. As the 10 figures continued their measured approach toward his ranch compound, Ezra found himself reassessing every assumption that had guided his mission since arriving on Earth. The creatures moving through his wheat field possessed technology that had remained completely undetected by scanners capable of identifying molecular signatures from orbital distances. Their communication systems operated on principles that his people used only for their most classified operations. Their organizational structure suggested social development that had been ongoing for centuries or millennia, without leaving any traces that galactic surveillance had been able to detect. The leader of the approaching group, a massive figure whose bearing suggested authority accumulated over many decades, stopped at the edge of Ezra's property line and raised one enormous hand in what appeared to be a gesture of greeting. When he spoke again, his words carried harmonics that identified him as not just intelligent, but educated according to principles that transcended any single world's development. "We request permission to enter your domain, Star Traveler. Our business concerns matters that affect both our peoples, and the time for hiding behind shadows and campfire stories has ended. Will you receive us as the intelligence operative you are? Or shall we continue this charade that you are merely a human rancher who has never seen anything stranger than a two-headed calf?" The formal courtesy of the request, combined with its obvious command of information that should have been impossible for any Earth-based intelligence to obtain, forced Ezra to acknowledge that he was facing a first-contact situation, unlike any scenario his training had prepared him for. These were not primitive creatures to be studied and categorized, but representatives of an advanced civilization that had been operating on Earth far longer than his own people had suspected. Ezra walked slowly across his yard toward the property line, his alien physiology automatically adjusting to optimize for potential combat, while his conscious mind grappled with diplomatic protocols that had never been designed for encounters with indigenous intelligence that possessed superior operational security. His enhanced senses detected at least 15 additional Sasquatch positioned around his ranch perimeter, their presence so perfectly camouflaged that even direct examination could barely distinguish them from natural landscape features. When he reached the fence that marked his property boundary, Ezra found himself face to face with the leader of the Sasquatch Assembly, a being whose physical presence was overwhelming, but whose eyes held depths of intelligence and experience that commanded respect rather than fear. Up close, the sophisticated nature of their technology became even more apparent. What appeared to be natural fur was actually a biotechnological interface that connected each individual to a network of environmental sensors and communication systems that spanned continents. "I am Thornbeard the Ancient," the Sasquatch leader said, his voice now carrying the formal precision of diplomatic introduction. "I have walked these lands for 97 of your years, and my people have guarded this world since before your species learned to kindle fire. We know of your mission, Star Traveler, and we know that your reports to the Stellar Collective have dismissed our existence as human imagination. The time has come for truth between our peoples." Ezra's response required careful navigation of protocols that existed in theoretical frameworks, but had never been applied to actual contact situations. "Thornbeard the Ancient," he replied, employing the respectful address forms that his people used when acknowledging peer-level intelligence. "I am indeed Ezra Blackwood, and I acknowledge that my understanding of this world's indigenous development has been incomplete. I would be honored to learn more about your people and to explore possibilities for cooperation between our civilizations." What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary first contact negotiation in galactic history, conducted in a Montana wheat field while the sun set behind mountains that had witnessed the rise and development of terrestrial intelligence that had remained hidden from the galaxy's most advanced surveillance systems. The Sasquatch Assembly had not revealed themselves merely to correct Ezra's scientific misconceptions, but because they had detected signs of a threat that required cooperation between Earth's indigenous guardians and its alien observers. Thornbeard's explanation revealed a level of strategic awareness that challenged every assumption about primitive versus advanced civilization. The Sasquatch had been monitoring not just alien activity on Earth, but galactic politics throughout the local stellar neighborhood. Their intelligence networks had detected preparations for what appeared to be a large-scale invasion attempt by hostile forces that viewed Earth as a strategic target for both its location and its resources. "Your people see this world as a study subject," Thornbeard explained, his words carrying weight that spoke of discussions held in council chambers hidden deep beneath mountain ranges. "But we see it as our responsibility to protect. For millennia, We have stood guard against threats that your primitive human subjects could never comprehend, and now we face a challenge that requires alliance with those who travel between stars. The threat assessment that Thornbeard shared with Ezra was comprehensive, detailed, and terrifying in its implications. An alliance of aggressive spacefaring civilizations had identified Earth as a perfect staging area for expansion into this sector of the galaxy. The planet's strategic location, abundant resources, and relatively primitive human population made it an ideal target for conquest and colonization. More importantly, the invading forces had developed tactics specifically designed to neutralize the kind of advanced surveillance and defense systems that galactic civilizations typically employed. Ezra's own people, the Stellar Collective, had been targeted for elimination or neutralization because their protective interest in Earth made them obstacles to conquest. The invasion forces had spent decades developing intelligence about collective operations throughout the solar system, and they possessed detailed plans for neutralizing every known Stellar Collective asset, including deep reconnaissance agents like Ezra. But the invaders had made the same mistake that the Stellar Collective itself had made. They had assumed that Earth's only significant intelligence was human, and had not accounted for the possibility that the planet possessed indigenous guardians whose capabilities extended far beyond primitive stone tools and campfire legends. The Sasquatch Assembly had been preparing for this threat for over a century, developing technologies and strategies that incorporated both their ancient understanding of terrestrial systems and advanced principles that they had developed through careful study of visiting alien civilizations. Their approach to defense was unlike anything in galactic military doctrine, based on integration with natural systems rather than domination over them. As the night deepened and their conversation continued, Ezra began to understand that the shadows that had crossed his ranch were not just the beginning of first contact, but the revelation of a defense network that spanned the entire planet. The 10 Sasquatch who had revealed themselves were representatives of thousands of others who had remained hidden, while preparing to defend their world against threats that most inhabitants would never know existed. The cooperation agreement that gradually emerged from their negotiations represented a fundamental shift in both civilizations' approach to planetary defense. Ezra would serve as liaison between the Sasquatch Assembly and the Stellar Collective, helping to coordinate efforts between galactic and terrestrial intelligence. The Sasquatch would share their advanced camouflage and environmental integration technologies, while the Stellar Collective would provide access to galactic intelligence networks and interstellar communication systems. More importantly, their alliance would be based on recognition that Earth's defense required both galactic perspective and indigenous knowledge, that the most effective protection would come from combining the Stellar Collective's understanding of interstellar threats with the Sasquatch Assembly's mastery of terrestrial systems. The months that followed tested both civilizations' ability to adapt to partnership with intelligences whose capabilities and perspectives had been unknown to them. Ezra's ranch became the unofficial headquarters for coordination between species that had been operating in complete ignorance of each other, despite sharing the same world for decades. The defense network that they developed together incorporated the best elements of both approaches. Sasquatch integration with natural systems provided perfect camouflage and environmental awareness, while Stellar Collective technology offered early warning systems and communication capabilities that operated across interstellar distances. The combination created a defensive capability that was far more effective than either civilization could have achieved alone. The invasion, when it finally came, arrived exactly as Thornbeard had predicted, but encountered resistance that the attacking forces had never anticipated. Earth's defense was conducted not by primitive humans or predictable alien technology, but by an alliance that had learned to combine galactic science with terrestrial wisdom in ways that created tactical advantages no outside force could have planned for. The battle was fought in mountain ranges where Sasquatch knowledge of terrain provided perfect defensive positions, using weapons that combined Stellar Collective energy systems with biotechnology that adapted to environmental conditions in real time. The invading forces found themselves facing opponents who could disappear into landscapes that seemed empty, while maintaining communication networks that operated through methods their intelligence services had never encountered. The victory was decisive but costly, requiring both species to reveal capabilities that they had hoped to keep hidden from galactic attention. But the successful defense of Earth established precedents for indigenous galactic cooperation that would influence interstellar relations for centuries to come. Years later, as Ezra sat around a campfire in the mountains above his ranch, sharing stories and strategic planning with beings who had become his closest friends and most trusted advisors. He often reflected on the evening when 10 shadows had crossed his property and shattered every assumption about intelligence, civilization, and the nature of planetary guardianship. The campfire stories that he had dismissed as primitive mythology had proven to be the most sophisticated intelligence operation in the planet's history. The creatures he had considered impossible were actually the most successful example of advanced civilization, integrating with natural systems that galactic science had ever encountered. The alien cowboy who had thought Bigfoot was just folklore had discovered that sometimes the most important truths were hidden in the stories that seemed too impossible to believe, and that wisdom often came disguised as legend when it needed to remain hidden from those who were not yet ready to understand its true significance. The shadows that had crossed his ranch had brought not just first contact, but the beginning of a partnership that proved indigenous knowledge and galactic science could combine to create possibilities that neither could achieve alone. The Sasquatch who had stepped out of campfire stories and into reality had given Ezra far more than scientific education. They had provided him with the understanding that true intelligence lay not in dismissing what seemed impossible, but in remaining open to discoveries that could change everything about how one understood the universe and one's place within it.